Welcome to Working Session 8 on the specifically selected topic, tolerance and non-discrimination. Just to let everyone know, the speakers list is now closed. We've reached maximum capacity. And one other brief note, I want to remind all participants to kindly familiarize themselves with the rules for filming in the plenary hall as indicated in the General Information and Organizational Modalities document available on the HDIM website. Live streaming of the 2017 HDIM is available. Filming with cameras and other video cameras is only permitted by accredited journalists. No other audio-visual recording should be undertaken without the explicit permission of individuals being filmed. Before we turn to our introducers, I would like to first give the floor to ODIHR Director Gisladottir for some introductory remarks. Director, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Christina. The reason why I asked for the floor here in the beginning of this session is to remind all of us that today is the International Day of Democracy, and the theme this year is democracy and conflict prevention. And I think this is very relevant, not only because we are halfway through this impressive meeting, the HDIM, but also because the title is a description of what we do in the OSCE. The human dimension, which we are debating and discussing here in Warsaw, is a key to security. Strengthening democratic institutions, values and practices is the most effective way of preventing conflict, both within and between societies, by promoting security for all. From the very beginning, the understanding of the vital role of democratic institutions and elections, of defending human rights and fundamental freedoms, and of promoting tolerance and non-discrimination in preventing conflict have been hardwired into the OSCE comprehensive concept of security. And this is what we want to focus on here today. Yesterday, we unfortunately witnessed discourse which does not belong in a forum set on discussing how we can further tolerance. In fact, it does not belong anywhere. Please let us respect each other here in this hall as well as outside it. Ladies and gentlemen, I wish you all a dynamic, substantial, but not at least a respectful debate here today.
Thank you very much, Director. I'd like to turn now to our first introducer, Ms. Caroline Fernandez de la Hoz. Ms. de la Hoz is the Director of the Spanish Center for Racism and Xenophobia at the Secretary General for Immigration and Emigration of the Ministry of Employment and Social Security of Spain since March of 2005. She is a medical epidemiologist by training and has served in different positions related to international matters in national and EU institutions. As director of OBERACS, she is responsible for collecting and analyzing information on racism and xenophobia in Spain to provide information for action, promoting the principle of equal treatment and non-discrimination and the fight against racism and xenophobia, and collaborating and coordinating with public and private national and international institutions related to the prevention and fight against racism and xenophobia. Ms. de la Hoz, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for this kind introduction. Good morning to everyone here. It's my honor to address this very important audience in this Human Dimension Implementation Meeting 2017. And I would like to thank ODIHR and especially the Tolerance and Non-Discrimination Department for the invitation to participate. I will try to give you the perspective from my position in a public institution and also as national contact point in Spain for ODIHR in the prevention and fight against hate crime. You know that countries have become more and more diverse due to migration and other reasons, and this brings wealth to countries, but it also brings huge challenges. When we don't accept others, then we have racism, we have xenophobia, we have intolerance in general, which can go from a personal, individual feeling to discrimination actions or to the most severe presentation of intolerance, which is hate crime with its devastating effects. That's why the Ministerial Council of the OSCE has repeatedly reaffirmed the threat that hate crime poses to security of individuals, but also of the communities, and also the risk that it has to lead to potential conflicts and violence. And this is shown in several decisions which have been accepted and agreed by all the participating countries. That is why we, the countries participating in OSCE and in ODIHR, committed to work for the prevention and for the fight of hate crime in different areas. No? We committed to collect information so that we can describe what our scenario is and we can fight and find the best strategies to prevent hate crime. We committed also to train our police bodies, our judicial operators. We committed also to develop legislation and to work with civil society, which really helps us to understand what is going on in society and is usually close to victims, and also to use education. So what we see in this slide is the information of the data we submit on hate crime every year, and we still have only 17 countries which are able to provide data disaggregated by bias motivation. So we are all making big efforts, but there is still a lot of work to do in front of us. I will try to describe a bit what has been the Spanish itinerary in the fight against hate crime. We probably had a compendium of circumstances and experiences which in a point in the time created the proper substract to have important decisions in this field. For instance, we had a huge increase of immigrant population in 1 decade, so that 10 years ago, a bit more than 10 years ago now, we had less than 1% of the population in Spain was from immigrant origin, and 10 years later we have more than 10%. So we moved from 800,000 of immigrants to more than 5 million. So this was a challenge for the country, and strategies for integration, and also a lot of funds were invested. The legislation regulating the duties and the rights of the immigrants was also launched, and in this legislation it was established that it should be monitored the potential racist or xenophobic incidents that could happen. Another important experience was the experience of the prosecutor's office in Barcelona. They appointed a specific prosecutor to deal with homophobic attacks that were occurring, and they didn't know very well how to deal with that. So some specific person was should specialize in giving a response to that. We had also a wide experience in fighting domestic violence, which also showed a good track to follow. And we had also the guide of international institutions and also organizations, and also the European Union, which is binding for European countries. So guiding and request to provide data and to do other things. So all this was providing the field to work in the fight of hate crime. I will give you a picture of the different things what we have been doing. Most of them happened at the same time, but I will follow some order. So the first one was the strategic and legal framework. In 2011, it was launched the comprehensive strategy to fight against racism, xenophobia, and other intolerance, which provided objectives and suggested activities to fight these problems, such as amending the penal code, working in coordination with the civil society, improving information systems, etc. So it was the first steps for the public institutions and also for the private and the civil society to have an umbrella of activities guiding their work. And another important milestone was the amendment of the Penal Code in 2015, which included in the crime catalogue the incitement of hate crime against minorities, bias motivation and aggravating element to any other crime, and also penalization of hate speech. And the victims are important actors protagonists in this issue. So. In 2015, it was launched also the Statute of the Victim of Crime, developing the rights of the victims, trying to avoid secondary victimization, and culminating the transposition in Spain of Directive 2012/29. Another important milestone is this one. Yeah. Another important milestone was the reform of the State Attorney General Office. So from Barcelona, from the Barcelona experience, it was decided to extend this very good experience and to establish specialized prosecutors in all the Spanish prosecutors' offices. So prosecutors specialized on hate crime and discrimination, and they will help to have a better identification of hate crimes, more effective criminal research, improving statistical control, and also developing common criteria for implementation and application of the law. And also a national specialized prosecutor was appointed to coordinate all the work in the different provinces. Something what we did in Spain that triggered a cascade of positive consequences was the training of security forces. This was done in 2012. It was a memorandum of understanding between the Ministry of Interior and the Ministry of Employment. 22,000 police officers were trained in a program of training trainers. And from that, a tool was provided, a handbook for training. A revision of the criminal statistic information system in Spain was done. And from 2013 on, disaggregated information was provided, not only on bias motivation, but also on characteristics of the victim, on the aggressor, and on the place, time when hate crime occurred. The Ministry of Interior launched also an action protocol for the security forces, including hate crime indicators and also all the procedures that the police officers should follow. And also an interesting development is the social partner, which is within the police, which is a police officer which is in charge of bridging and relating with civil society and also with other institutions, such as the prosecutor and others. Cooperation between public institutions and with civil society is absolutely essential to have good results. So we have, in Spain we don't have one coordination mechanism, but there are different platforms, but the issue is working, even if it looks a bit complex, it's working. We have several platforms working and providing assistance to victims, like the Council of Victims of Hate Crime and Discrimination, which is 20 NGOs working on that. We have a Council of Elimination of Racial or Ethnic Discrimination, which provides also an assistance service for victims, also provided by 8 NGOs. the Ministry of Justice launched this summer the Advice Council for Victims. We have also funding every year from our Secretary General for NGOs projects on racism and xenophobia. And there is also an important committee, interministerial committee with all the ministries which have a relation to hate crime, justice, interior, health, employment, and also the National Prosecutor's Office, the Council of Judges, and also the NGOs, trying to coordinate action and also to plan actions for the future. Raising awareness among society is very important, because all what we develop is within our society. So we publish every year an annual report on the evolution on racism, xenophobia, and other intolerance in Spain, to know what the situation is and how it evolves. Education is also a very important tool. So we work with schools, with school authorities, teachers, families, to promote inclusive schools and exchange good practices. And also the role of health professionals is very important, because they are in a privileged situation to identify a bias motivation in patients who suffered an aggression and are seeking their medical assistance. So they can provide support, and they can also report to the judicial authorities. So we are working also with health professionals. And we also are providing translations translations into Spanish of guides, which are very useful for all our operators, like the ODIR guides. And we translated last year also the general recommendation number 15 of ECRI, also on hate speech into Spanish. And so what we have in general now is police, judicial operators, society, also politicians, media, who in Spain know what hate crime is in a different degree, and in a different degree they know how to work on it. And this helps to make our society more resilient and to improve our work. So to finalize, I just would like to mention in the terrorist attack we had in Barcelona last 17th of August, you probably know, you know that this is a very critical situation, because can put communities one against other. So I can suggest what we saw it worked is what I show you here. Politicians denounced violence and spoke strongly against associating terror with any one group in the population. This is very useful. The media publications went in the same line. If there is a reactive hate violence, if reactive hate violence occurs, strongly condemn and act against it. And finally, which is very important, encourage and support strong civil society, because they have an important contribution to counter hateful messaging. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I'd like to now move to our second introducer, Mr. Fiaz Mughal. Okay. Fiaz Mughal is the founder and director of Faith Matters, which works on reducing extremism and developing platforms for discourse and interaction between Muslim, Sikh, Christian, and Jewish communities across the United Kingdom. He also founded the national hate crime project Tell Mama, and was the director of this nationally recognized faith hate crime reporting project from 2011 to 2016. He set up the reporting procedures and the classifications of incidents, has lobbied central government, police, and crime commissioners, members of parliament, and EU stakeholders, and successfully implemented a national reporting and process. Fiaz is also the founder of the National No to Hate Crime Awards, which recognizes individuals and organizations working against hatred and intolerance. Mr. Mughal was honored as an officer of the British Empire for his work with communities in 2009 and has been a counselor for 6 years in both Oxford and the London borough of Haringey. He has also been working on programs at the local, national, and international level on countering extremism, and was initially part of the extremism task force convened after the 7/7 terrorist bombings in London in 2005. As founder and director of Faith Matters and Tell Mama, Mr. Mughal has been regularly featured on mainstream TV, cable and print media sources, and has therefore set up the equivalent of the Community Security Trust, which works on Jewish community security, for the reporting of anti-Muslim hate. Mr. Mughal, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. For a second, I thought you were talking about somebody else, so thank you very much for that introduction. I certainly can't recognize a lot of that in my life, but thank you very much for that. I just wanted to kick off by saying, obviously, apart from it's a pleasure and an honor to be here, I think the topic is really important, and it's important because if we're talking about coalition building, it's even more important within a globalized world and a globalized environment in which we live, where there are more risks potentially, but there are more opportunities. And so coalition building really is at the heart of not just work on hate crime, but actually work within civil society and within communities. But let me also just start off by saying that actually by entering into coalitions, there is one fundamental foundation that is actually set by organizations, whether they are governmental or whether they are NGOs, that actually is fundamental in the process. And that is a set of shared values that are created by coalition building. And this is absolutely key. And I say this, it might sound obvious, but actually, if we're looking at integration of communities, if we're looking at inclusion and cohesion of communities, by entering into partnerships, a set of shared values are consolidated and built through such networks, and also through the messaging that's sent out to communities by building strong partnerships. So let me give you an example. Within the UK, one of the things we did early on in our project was to actually partner up with the CST, which is the Community Security Trust, the Jewish community's arm for anti-Semitic monitoring. We also partnered up with Gallup, which is a London-based LGBT hate crime monitoring service. But by doing that, we also sent out a really strong public message that actually, as individuals working on monitoring and supporting victims of anti-Muslim hatred, we also would challenge anti-Semitism both within and beyond communities, including within Muslim communities. But we also sent a message out that we would also challenge LGBTQ hatred where we found it. So what happens is there's a set of shared values that are essentially promoted through collaboration and partnership working. And I think that's really important to state, because actually it helps in a range of areas. I talked about integration, community cohesion, etc. So really essential that actually strong partnerships also promote the fact that these core values are part of that process. In addition to that, by adding to that, the promotion of these shared values also helps to push aside narratives and thinking that may be exclusionary and in some instances extreme in its outlook. So the issue of standing up, for example, against LGBT hatred, against anti-Semitism, is really important, not just because it's an important thing to do and the right thing to do. It's important because it acts as a counter against, for example, Islamist extremism. So there are byproducts of such really important partnerships, and I think it's really important to kind of state that in the process, that actually groups and individuals who may not have the same values, such partnerships actually build an opportunity to take those ideas and ideologies on. So just that's my starting gambit. But let me just quickly move on to an area that I think partnerships can also help in, and the second point on my slide, partnerships also help to balance in hate crime work the issue between free speech and hate speech. So really important that actually organizations, by coming together, look at this balance between what is free speech, a fundamental right, and what is hate speech, and that collaboration, the exchange of ideas, ensures that such partnerships actually add to this debate. So another important element that I think also is a fundamental part of hate crime work is ensuring that potential balance. The third area which I wanted to introduce in all of this is the issue of good practice. Okay, so coalition building and partnership building not just introduce good practice in the equation, they also ensure that actually the penetration and the reach of work is expanded, but also in the process of that, good practice is shared between partners and within communities. And one of the areas, for example, that we've done in the UK is to work with an organization called Stand Up and the CST to work within schools to share really good practice of what, basically of issues around anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, LGBTQ hatred, but to share those practices much wider through the collaboration and the partnership work. So good practice is circulated and shared really effectively. And I think one of the other areas that I think needs to be mentioned in this debate is the fact that actually through collaboration and through partnerships, there is a real opportunity to actually lever in other elements of resources within communities. So the fact that actually partnerships can bring in groups that may be marginalized, like women's groups, youth groups, disabled groups, levering in individuals who may feel external to the process is a fundamental part of the benefits of working with other organizations. And actually in the world of hate crime, we know that women, particularly in the world of Islamophobia that I work within, that women are the most affected. So through partnerships, we can lever in such communities and such groups directly into the hate crime reporting mechanism. So collaboration is a fundamental part of the whole process. It might seem obvious, but really important to restate that. And I think there are some really interesting things that collaboration can do. Now, you can't see that, the graph's very small, but what I was showing here is actually our hate crime reporting mechanism is really expanded through collaboration work. And it allows us, when there are, for example, terrorist incidences and attacks that take place, it allows us to get really strong penetration into localized areas, which allows us to pick up the peaks that happen, the peaks of hate crime reporting that happen after a major terrorist incident and a major terrorist attack. Why? Because actually, through the collaborative effect, we get local groups who are engaging, local groups who know what hate crime work is, who understand what the line may be between free speech and hate speech, who also understand that there is a process by which victims can get access to justice. So actually, picking up the very minor details of what the impacts are in communities only happens through collaboration and through partnership working. And if there is weak partnership working and weak collaboration, you're actually missing out on the very serious impacts of what happens after major terrorist impacts and terrorist attacks. As has been mentioned before, there are significant blowback effects and significant impacts on communities after such incidences. So what does partnership working provide in addition to what I've also mentioned? The fact of the matter is that there are numerous impacts of hate crimes across communities. It's not just individuals, it's institutions that are affected, it's communities as a whole that are affected, it's perception that gets impacted upon, and a sense of identity that is also impacted upon. And so in all of that process, what's absolutely fundamental is actually the ability for victims to get access to justice. And one of the maps, or the two maps that I've shown up there, actually show the reach and penetration of what we are achieving because of multiple partners, not just on the ground, but at a strategic level. We also have a data sharing agreement, which is with the government and with police forces across the country. So we have a data sharing agreement with 24 forces in England and Wales, which means that actually we also not only get data from individuals and communities, we actually get data from police forces at the end of the month, allowing us to build up a very rich picture of not just hate incidences, but actually what is taking place around community tensions around community turbulences and issues, but also whether there are some serious impacts of where communities are actually having a go at each other at a local level. So we're able to pick up very interesting, collaborative, and I would say quite penetrative, positive data of what is taking place. So a couple of last things before I finish. Just to say that actually I think in the world of hate crime, we can't leave out the fact that the online world is also very toxic today. We can't leave that fact out. And actually, as part of the partnership working and part of the partnership agreement, there has to be the ability to work with social media companies. Now, it's not an easy job because, you know, clearly they have their line, they have the bottom element of their businesses is about making money, it's about expanding their platform. For those groups like us, it's about reducing the level of hate and intolerance that may be promoted through their platforms. But actually, as part of the collaborative process, it's really essential to engage with and work with not just these companies, but actually ensure that in the whole process, politicians are also engaged with at a local and a national level. And that, I talked about police forces and their data, but that is also essential to be fed into the process when working with such agencies, because hard data, hard facts are absolutely important in all of these partnership processes and in all of these discussions in order for victims actually to get some sense of a process and a due process and access to justice. So let me just finish off by saying the key things here is that, you know, we need to look at any agencies working in this area need to look at potential partners that are beyond just the community they serve. The fact that actually police forces are an essential tool, an essential part of that collaborative process. Thirdly, the political landscape is absolutely key to engage with. Fourth, the fact that actually we have a different changing landscape of hate crime work with the online sphere, and so social media companies are an essential part of that process. And I would say fifth, it really comes down to this. It is about, and hate crime work really is about, shared values. It really is. It's about human rights and about sustaining those and protecting those for victims to get access to justice. And that's really the final statement. That's the concept of hate crime work. And if nothing else you take away from my general blabber and my general talk, the fact is that actually those shared values and the protection of human rights for individuals and communities who suffer hate crimes is the core element of hate crime work. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will now turn to the speakers list, which again is full. I just want to remind speakers that you can only take the floor in the capacity in which you're registered, and only entities registered on the speakers list can be represented. Interventions are expected to be presented in a meaningful, orderly, and respectful manner. Please make recommendations. Please front load your presentation with that recommendation. Speakers will have 2 minutes. Also, please submit your statements to the interpreters beforehand. They won't be distributed to participants without your consent to ensure proper translation. Okay. For speaking, please introduce yourself and your name or organization or delegation or institution that you represent. Turning now to the first speaker, I have Human Rights Without Frontiers, which will be followed by France on behalf of the EU. Human Rights Without Frontiers, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you to the introducers and to the moderator. My name is Leah Pericris, and I am the Deputy Director of Human Rights Without Frontiers. Human Rights Without Frontiers recommends that the Kazakhstan authorities grant full religious freedom to Kazakh citizens who adhere to the teachings of peaceful religious movements of foreign origin, including the freedom of association, freedom of worship and assembly, and the freedom to share their beliefs. To allow non-Kazakh citizens to fully enjoy their religious freedom while staying in the country and to not deport them. To cease the prosecution of believers who peacefully share their beliefs with others under Criminal Code Article 174, Part 2, which reads incitement of social, national, clan, racial, or religious discord, to release all prisoners of conscience sentenced on the basis of this previously mentioned criminal code article, and to lift the ban on the peaceful Tablighi Jamaat movement. According to the latest report of the U.S. State Department on Religious Freedom in Kazakhstan, religious groups that the government considers traditional reported general acceptance and tolerance by the government. However, non-traditional religious groups, such as followers of the Tablighi Jamaat, Jehovah's Witnesses, and foreign believers, continued to experience heightened scrutiny and prosecution. Human Rights Without Frontiers has documented the majority of these cases in our global database of religious prisoners and has conducted in-depth research on each of these religious and belief groups, finding them to be peaceful groups that do not commit or advocate violence or terrorism. As of 1st of July 2017, 59 Sunni Muslims who are followers of the peaceful Tablighi Jamaat movement have been given criminal convictions since December 2014 in Kazakhstan. More than 40
May I
of these
kindly ask the
cases
speaker to conclude?
have been documented by Human Rights Without Frontiers. Kazakhstan has also ordered the branch of the Jehovah's Witnesses in Almaty, Kazakhstan.
I'm sorry, I'm going to have to
suspend
ask you to
operations.
conclude your statement. It can be circulated.
I thank you for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now move on to France on behalf of the EU, to be followed by the United States of America.
Merci. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm making this declaration on behalf of the European Union and also the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia, Montenegro, Albania, Bosnia-Herzegovina, Liechtenstein, Ukraine, Moldova, Georgia, and Andorra. The European Union is based on the values of human dignity, equality, and respect for human rights. Hate crimes are an affront to the fundamental values of the European Union and of the OSCE. They are not only an attack on the victim or those who identify with the victim, but also to all of the human collective by undermining the cohesion that is necessary for the social contract of our contemporary societies, and that is why hate crimes must not remain unpunished. And a challenge in this regard is the underreporting of hate crimes. Today, most hate crimes, in particular but not exclusively against Roma, against LGBT persons, or against certain individuals because of their religions, are neither reported nor prosecuted. This does not mean, and for this reason they remain invisible, leaving victims with no means to obtain reparations for their suffering and prejudice. Now, what about the recommendations of the European Union to combat hate crimes? Well, they are the following. First, actively to cooperate with the Office of Democratic Institutions and Human Rights of the OSCE and fully to support its activities in the prevention of hate crimes, and in particular, to collect all of the relevant data. To support and to strengthen the action of civil society and its contribution to the prevention and the combating of hate crimes, in particular to strengthen cooperation and trust among police forces, other competent authorities, and NGOs concerned, in particular by exchanging relative data, put in place mechanisms for reporting by third parties, to train the police and lawyers in the recognition of hate crimes. Third, to take all appropriate measures to improve the collection of statistics on hate crimes through their reporting and their registration with a view to guaranteeing access for all victims to justice. To strengthen the combating of hate crimes committed on the internet with full respect for freedom of expression, to prevent and combat hate discourse and crimes through the education of human rights and the promotion of virtues of diversity, equality, and inclusion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now move to the United States of America, to be followed by the Russian Federation. If France could.
There we go. Thank you, moderator. No person should fear from being violently attacked because of who they are, what they believe, or how they worship. Our Department of Justice has prosecuted a number of high-profile hate crimes this year. In March, the FBI, working with international partners, arrested a suspect for allegedly making threatening phone calls to Jewish community centers across the nation. In June, a federal grand jury returned an indictment against a man in Texas for burglary and arson of the Victoria Islamic Center. He faces up to 40 years in prison. A man was sentenced to over 19 years for trying to recruit people to burn down a mosque in New York State. We have and will continue to enforce hate crimes aggressively and appropriately where LGBT individuals are involved. Joshua Bandon Valum was sentenced to 49 years in prison for assaulting and murdering Mercedes Williamson. Violence against LGBTI persons is widespread within our OSCE community, and we must all combat it. My country and many others were appalled by reports from credible sources of mass detentions, torture, and killing committed against at least 100 LGBTI individuals by local security forces in Chechnya. Kadyrov's press secretary said, quote, "It's impossible to arrest those who don't exist," and that if there were gay men in the region, the police would not have to deal with them as their own families would get rid of them. Members of the official Chechen regional human rights body said any self-respecting Chechen would do everything in his power to make sure people like that didn't exist in society. She told state media the entire judicial system would treat murderers of homosexuals by relatives with understanding, adding that she would not even bother considering a claim regarding such a crime. The Russian government's investigation into these crimes against LGBTI persons has not produced results. Evidence of these abuses continues to be documented by NGOs and journalists. Impunity remains a systemic problem in Chechnya. In recent months alone, we've seen reports of mass execution of men in detention and collective punishment of an entire village that complained of mistreatment by security forces. We urge the Russian government to ensure that all residents of Chechnya are afforded human rights protections in Russian law. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I now move to the Russian Federation, to be followed by ADF International.
Уважаемый
Madam Moderator, Russia, along with 136 states, has supported the annual UN General Assembly resolution expressing deep concern regarding any glorification of Nazi movement. And in this regard, we'd like to draw attention to wide-ranging violations of human rights in Ukraine, where a number of legal and administrative acts have been adopted to whitewash or glorify Nazi accomplices, and also to distort history and youth education in this regard. A strategy was adopted along with a recommendation to promote this approach in schools and universities, partly by distorting the role of the Red Army in liberating Europe from fascism. The legal basis for this is the Act on the Legal Status and Commemoration of Fighters for Ukrainian Independence, which has involved the Ukrainian Insurgent Army and the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists. In accordance with the law, collaborators who fought against the Red Army received social support from the state. Their biography is open for study, and the ignorance of their rights carries legal liability. There's another law with similar effect on condemnation of communist and national socialist totalitarian regime and prohibition of their symbols. That is focused on eradicating the Soviet past, changing place names, street names, which are linked to the USSR, and also the physical destruction of communist legacy. The Ukrainian authorities, however, particularly honor the memory of fascist accomplices. In Lizhkov Seminary in Lvov, there is a memorial to the SS Galichna. There's many street names are named after them. Mein Kampf is freely available. So bad examples are, or lead to further bad examples. We see other participating states following similar practices. Poland is a worrying case, which has really launched a full-on war on Soviet memorials. In light of the above, we reaffirm what is stated in the Resolution 71179 of the UN General Assembly, namely that the above-mentioned acts can be considered as falling under the force of the UN Convention on Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination. We'd like all OSCE delegations to take note of this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now turn to ADF International, to be followed by Western Thrace Minority University Graduates Association.
Madam Moderator, ladies, gentlemen, my name is Jennifer Lee. ADF International urges the OSCE to restate its original commitment to the fullest freedom of expression of ideas and beliefs, unimpeded by the overmultiplication of hate crime laws, specifically hate speech laws. ADF International also asks the OSCE to commit to a definition of free speech that includes not only the inoffensive, but also the irritating, the contentious, and the provocative, provided it does not provoke violence. ADF International calls participating states to resist the trend to criminalize hate speech and to remember that to penalize ideas, whatever their nature, is to pave the way for tyranny. For years, we have fought for the freedom of conscience and speech. The 1990 Copenhagen document affirms that everyone will have the right to freedom of expression. Free speech is not speech you agree with. It reflects a tolerance for diverse opinions. Yet today, freedom of speech is at risk, as is evidenced by the recent multiplication of free speech zones and canceled college conferences in North America and in some European countries. As Alan Dershowitz states, among the first victims of another attack will be civil rights and freedom of speech. The very purpose of the HDIM is to exchange and protect diversity of ideas. It behooves the OSCE states, therefore, to consider three main points related to hate crimes, specifically hate speech. First, it is unclear how prevalent hate speech is, who is gathering and reporting the data, and how is that data reported. According to the Guide to Hate Crime Data Collection, there is no consistent research on hate speech because participating states have adopted diverse approaches to collecting that data. Second, hate speech laws are varied and vague, and as such, unacceptably stifle the very vibrant and vocal civil societies we have worked so hard to build. Realize hate speech laws criminalizing words by private individuals and public figures, who, by the way, are often elected and or paid to advocate for ideas. Will we now criminalize them for that? Finally, multiplying hate speech crimes will ultimately turn our state courts of law into courts of public and political opinion. Trials will necessarily query into statements, blogs, Twitter feeds, etc., many of which are inherently political or philosophical or religious.
May I kindly ask the speaker to conclude?
In closing, multiple hate crime speech laws in the name of tolerance will not only have an unbearable chilling effect, it will ultimately lead to the reign of the most intolerant of tyrants, namely tolerance
Please conclude.
itself.
Thank you very much. I now turn to Western Thrace Minority University Graduates Association, to be followed by NGO Public Advocacy.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. My name is Pervin Hayrullah. I am representing the Turkish minority of Western Thrace in Greece here. In recent years, hate incidents, hate speech towards the Muslim Turkish identity and the Muslim holy places and associations appears to be widespread in Western Thrace. Those incidents are often triggered by the far-right local and national media and anti-Turkish hysteria of ultra-nationalist groups. We would like to give few examples. On 12 December 2016, the Friendship, Equality and Peace Party organized a conference in association with the Greek Helsinki Monitor in Athens. And the racist ultra-nationalist group attacked verbally to the organizers and provoked the conference. Another example is a suspicious fire on 22 March 2017 in Didimotiho. The historical Çelebi Sultan Mehmet Mosque, which is the biggest and unique example of its style in Europe, was damaged by a suspicious fire. The official discourse is far from persuading the minority, since the precautionary measures should have been taken while the renovation. Besides these two mentioned hate-motivated attacks, the Muslim Turkish minority's leading figures have become targets of hate speech since the last 2 decades. The religious leaders, the executive directors of the associations are being called as pseudo-pro-Turk, Turkish agents, snakes, and etc. Almost every day, the web pages like Turkika Neaciar, Phonitis Rodopis use degrading phrases while addressing Muslim Turkish people. No measure has been taken up to now. Therefore, Madam Moderator, the Turkish minority of Western Thrace calls upon the OSCE and international community to monitor the legislation process in Greece, since the current legislation is far from protecting the Turkish minority from hate-based attacks. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. I now have NGO Public Advocacy, to be followed by Morocco. A kind reminder to speakers to please turn off your microphone when you are done, and also introduce yourself and your organization. Thank you.
НПО «Общественная правозащита». Уважаемые
NGO Public Advocacy. Since 2011, we have been monitoring persecution of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, and Piotr Katsavov has submitted a declaration about this, and this is fully in accordance with reality. There is a tendency to take over churches, to attack, physically to attack believers, and so there is a full undermining the rights of those believers. And the police and the prosecution do absolutely nothing. Now, despite official submissions to the police, no single individual has been charged with crimes in this regard. And what is most concerning is that there is no public condemnation of these acts by representatives of the authorities. On the contrary, there is a rhetoric of hatred that we hear from responsible officials speaking through the media. And so we do believe that there should be an intervention by the OSCE. This amounts to defamation of our groups, which are charged with being anti-Ukrainian, which is certainly not the case. Now, the session that was held regarding the exchange of a certain church property was a complete failure. It was all done in camera. We are not able to receive any documents that would indicate on what official basis some property was transferred from one hand to another, from one church to another. Now, these are issues that we have mentioned in previous sessions. What we see now are new draft laws that are before the Ukrainian parliament that will result in even more repression of those religious organizations that are not convenient to the authority. The religious communities should have their rights fully respected. And this is something that is an absolute and complete violation of the basic rights of these people. Thank you for your attention.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm the ambassador of Morocco, which is partner country of the OSCE. Following the terrorist attacks that we've seen over the last year in Europe, we unfortunately see a stigmatization of the religion of Islam, but also against nationals of Morocco. Morocco has itself had to suffer the loss of victims in a number of attacks: Paris, Ouagadougou, Brussels, Nice, and our response is based on the faith that the actual reality of these attacks could not lead one to conclude that it is the Moroccan origin of some individuals who have committed acts which is responsible for those acts themselves. It is the allegiance to the Islamic State that causes these terrorists to act rather than their nationality. I would take this opportunity to reaffirm what has been advocated by participating states of the OSCE, the relevant resolutions of the UN, Article 14 of the European Rights and Human Rights Convention, and the European Commission provisions against racism adopted in 2014. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I now turn to Think Out, to be followed by NMZ, the Netzwerk. Think Out, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mrs. Moderator. I'm Aisha Elkilic. I'm the president of Think Out, a Belgium-based think tank. If we want to involve all citizens equally, we need to achieve that all citizens of the European Union can have access to all systems, like healthcare and education. Education starts in a nursery school. When the children move to the primary school, the school decides whether the children are ready to start at the primary school. The criterion is the capability of the children. When it comes to children of minority background, the criteria are different. One cannot use the language as an excuse to not move to the primary school. When started at the primary school, the counselor of the school advises the children of a minority background to subscribe in a university or in high school. This discrimination of children of a minority background in education has to end. Hrant Dink, a writer, once said, if you need an enemy to live your identity, then your identity is an illness or a disease. Today in Europe, the presence of identities is a disease or even an enemy. In other words, this is used to cover all the lacks and problems, and it's by consequence the enemy of the identities. That's why we have got to get rid of the Islamophobia and all other forms of discrimination if we we want to be healed of the diseases caused by our European identity. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now move to NMZ, the Netzwerk, to be followed by the Moscow Patriarchat.
My name is Gelse Taschka. I'm here as a representative for Netzwerk Muslimische Zivilgesellschaft. First of all, we feel glad that Austria is one of those countries who are collecting official data, but still police officers are often not willing to report hate crimes and incidents, or they don't treat the cases properly. This shows us that many police officers are not trained sufficiently on the matter. We had a case where someone threw a beer on a Muslim woman, or people pulled down the headgear of Muslim women. But these cases were not reported because officials argue that this is not seen as a physical injury and it is not fixed as such in the Austrian Penal Code. So if a woman still wants to fight against this kind of racism, she is totally left on her own to bring this case to the civil court. But people don't have the financial resources to do so, and because of this they lose trust in the state and its police officers. But it's very, very important. For this, I recommend and ask my country to adopt these points and I mentioned as hate crimes into the Austrian Penal Code, because these cases occur more and more often and we definitely need to prevent this. This is the best way my state can build trusting relationships to its Muslim citizens again, as well as to all other minorities struggling with racism, because these hate-motivated attacks must be reported officially. Furthermore, I want to mention that the Article 33 of the Austrian Penal Code, where it is written that if there are racist or hate-motivated attacks, this must get sanctioned harder. But after some researches with some other Austrian NGOs, which are also collecting data and offering victim support, we found out that in the last 20 to 30 years this law was rarely applied. But this is a very important step Austria should take, because we can clearly see the rise of the far right, which goes hand in hand with anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, xenophobia, and all other kind of discrimination towards all minorities, like refugees. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Please turn your microphone. Thank you. I now turn to the Moscow Patriarchat, to be followed by the Observatory on Intolerance, Discrimination against Christians in Europe. The Moscow Patriarchat, the floor is yours.
Прошу прощения.
I'm sorry here, Madam Chair, but I'm just looking for my text. At last year's session of HDIM in Warsaw, we expressed our concern about the situation of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church on the territory of Ukraine. Unfortunately, the situation has not changed. The rights and the freedoms of the believers and adherents to that church are being attacked and undermined. Over the last few months, there have been dozens of cases of illegal seizures of property of that church. Now, the Ukrainian authorities have claimed that these are voluntary transfers. That is absolutely not true. There are certain judicial decisions concerning the illegal seizure of this property, but this is not being put into reality by the forces of law and order. There have been dozens of cases of burning of Ukrainian churches, of attacks on believers, and these are not being investigated or prosecuted. There are obstacles put in the way of registration of these religious communities, and there are new draft laws that will make it possible for the church to be repressed even further in the future. There are all sorts of excuses being used to prevent registration of religious communities. The ultimate objective is obviously to liquidate this church, to legalize the seizure of its property, and to put the life of these religious communities fully under the control of the authorities, and to take away from this church its legal name, and this really puts into threat the confessional peace of the country. It is blatant and overt discrimination of the adherents of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, and we call on the OSCE to take note of all of these flagrant violations and to introduce the necessary measures to bring them to an end. Thank you.
Against Christians in Europe, to be followed by Stop Extremism.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. My name is Ellen Fantini, and I'm the Executive Director of the Observatory on Intolerance and Discrimination Against Christians in Europe. My full statement will be distributed. The annotated agenda for this session notes ODIHR's continued concern about the existence of gaps in reported official data on hate crimes. It praises civil society as a key partner in reporting hate crimes and asks how ODIHR can better support civil society's efforts. The Observatory reported 191 hate crimes against Christians in 16 European countries to ODIHR for inclusion in its 2016 hate crimes report. Yesterday, civil society organizations that submit hate crime data were given an opportunity to review the ODIHR's compilation of the data for 2016. Upon review, the Observatory makes the following observations. In the official police data, it appears that no country in Europe reported hate crimes against Christians, despite many reporting or disaggregating data in other categories, such as anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, xenophobia, racism, homophobia, and the like. This is despite nearly every case submitted by the Observatory having been investigated by police. Of the 191 crimes reported by the Observatory, only 38 of those cases were included in ODIHR's data, and those were only in Spain. For years, along with the Holy See, the Observatory has been one of the primary sources of information to ODIHR on hate crimes against Christians in Europe. We note with concern the absence of any cases reported by the Holy See. Two of many egregious examples of cases not reported in the official figures or by civil society include the July 26th brutal murder of Father Jacques Hamel in France and the premeditated murder of a Christian woman in Germany at the hands of her proclaimed anti-theist flatmate. While we assume that this was an oversight on ODIHR's part, it illustrates a concrete example of how the well-resourced ODIHR can support under-resourced civil society groups. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now turn to Stop Extremism, to be followed by European Center for Law and Justice.
Dear Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear Ms. Finch, the EU-wide movement Stop Extremism, which I represent here, has led the EU Commission to a comprehensive anti-extremism package of measures at the legal level which would allow an effective and joint action by all member states against tendencies that are based on hate speech, intolerance and legal to extremism and terror. They are not threats that only the EU has to deal with. It is a phenomenon active in all OECD member states. To effectively protect ourselves from extremism, we must not be indifferent to intolerance and hate, as they are the source of extremism. All of OECD member states are therefore requested to seize measures. The main sources of our engagement combines all levels of political and civil stakeholders, and we underline the need of deep cooperation and coordination among national authorities, participating states, and the dialogue with relevant international and regional NGOs. Basic rights and prosperity are not self-evident. We, here in the USCD region, have fought for our civil rights for centuries. Now we must also preserve them, as they are in danger, and with them peace, tolerance and liberty of today's and future's generation. Let me invite you all to our side events directly after this working session here in the plenary hall. My colleague and co-initiator of Stop Extremism, Ms. Atesh, will join me in giving you a more detailed description of our initiative. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. I now turn to European Center for Law and Justice, to be followed by Ukraine.
Merci.
Thank you very much. The European Centre for Law and Justice would like to draw the attention of the OSCE to the link between tolerance and non-discrimination and freedom of thought, conscience and religion. The protection of this is of the utmost importance for the peaceful and correct working of a pluralist liberal society which wants to see individuals of different beliefs and religions living together in peace. We would like to denounce certain acts which go against freedom of conscience and religion and give rise to discrimination, particularly with regard to Christians. Moral or ideological intolerance is reflected by hate speech against them in the media and social network, and this is something that's visible when issues such as euthanasia, abortion, or single-sex marriage are being discussed and debated. Also visible in the restriction of their freedom of conscience and religion and the freedom of expression, and that is without doubt a way of avoiding tolerance. So, mayors in France who refuse to carry out same-sex marriages are liable for heavy punishment. 30 of them have submitted a complaint on the 16th of November 2016 to the Committee of Human Rights of the United Nations because their freedom of conscience, they feel, has been violated. We're also worried about the recent French law extending the offence of preventing or hampering abortion. Now, this is biased because it is only pro-life speech which is penalized. It's unacceptable for a so-called liberal society to preach tolerance, but at the same time show intolerance, especially when this intolerance is in the name of tolerance. So our organization would like the OSCE to take into account in its legislation of the right of the individual to work in accordance with the imperatives of their own conscience, as they declared, as the participating states declared in the Helsinki Act. Thank you.
Now turn to Ukraine, to be followed by Wiener Akademiker Bund.
Topic of non-discrimination and combating the hate crime is closely related to the topic of full respect to the human rights. In this context, Ukrainian delegation would like one more time to remind about a very dramatic and demonstrative fact that shows that a lack of respect to the human rights could have, as a logical consequence of such approach, experience of unacceptable forms of the state violence that stand in the same line with the obvious, almost terroristic activity. I mean the kidnapping of 18-year-old Ukrainian Pavlo Grib, who was kidnapped by the representatives of the Russian secret services from the territory of Belarus when he agreed to meet there with his girlfriend. Kidnapping happened at 21st of August, in a day of the biggest Ukrainian holiday, Independence Day. It shows one more time that this event had obvious political background. Just in more than 2 weeks after the disappearance of the young man in Belarus, the Russian officials confirmed that he is sentenced in prison in Krasnodar, in several thousand kilometers from the place of kidnapping. Important to emphasize that the father of the kidnapped person is one of the leading persons in the chaplaincy department of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of the Kievan Patriarchate, and is working on creating the spiritual support of the Ukrainian army who oppose the Russian military interference in Donbass region. So, in the basis of the stated situation is an attempt to take revenge on the personal, family level to those representatives of the Ukrainian society that the most actively opposed to the military aggression of the Russian Federation. Also, we would like to remind about imprisonment for more than 1.5 years, the very famous Ukrainian religious studies scientist Igor Kozlovsky, who was arrested in Donbass. The only accusation to his address that he was organizing inter-religious meetings. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now turn to Wiener Akademiker Bund, to be followed by Pax Europa.
Thank you very much, Ms. Moderator. Distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, I'm Henrik Clausen speaking on behalf of Wiener Akademiker Bund. First, we wish to align ourselves fully with the statement just delivered by ADF International. On today's topic of hate crimes, Let me first express our puzzlement that there seems to be a desire to be more incidents reported. Traditionally, we prefer to see declines in number of crimes rather than increases. And now I have a case of best practice from Denmark. Here we have made a substantial step towards reducing hate crimes. Earlier this year, a Dane posted to the internet a video of a Quran being burned in his garden. That was initially considered a hate crime against Muslims, and the person was charged under the rarely used Danish blasphemy law. But pro-freedom activists and lawyers pointed out that there really wasn't any victim of this supposed crime, and that the charge of blasphemy was also a very uneven application of the law. After an intense public debate, the Danish blasphemy law was repealed this summer and the charges were dropped. Only one party, the Social Democrats, still were of the opinion that God needed protection by the law. The specific concern that had kept the blasphemy law on the books was that repealing it might potentially lead to more terrorist attacks against Danish targets. This has not been the case, and there's no indications that the threat of terrorism has increased after the repeal. Also, Norway and the Netherlands have recently repealed their laws against blasphemy, and like in Denmark, this has not led to terrorism. It is the opinion of Wiener Akademikerbund that the increase in liberty diminishes tension and thereby reduces the number of hate crimes. We therefore recommend that OSCE participating states repeal all blasphemy laws. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now turn to Pax Europa, to be followed by Commonwealth of the Independent States.
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator. First of all, Pax Europa would like to fully align itself with the statement made by ADF International. Ladies and gentlemen, it is a perversion of tolerance when it is used as an excuse for censoring views which are deemed offensive. True tolerance means allowing anybody to express their views, however disagreeable, and being free to tell them what you think of them. For advocates of true tolerance, the solution is never censorship, but ideological combat. Today, should anyone feel he has the license to disagree with the new arbiters of all that is good and right, that person is no longer merely someone with a different opinion. One case in point involves a Sheffield University social work postgraduate student who was expelled from his course for posting on his Facebook page that homosexual activity is against the teaching of the Bible. He was brought before a disciplinary board at the university after a fellow student reported the post. The so-called Fitness to Practice Committee told him after a hearing that he had been excluded from further study on a program leading to a professional qualification and was no longer recognized as a university student. This was because, as a result of his Facebook comments, he may have caused offense to some individuals, and transgressed boundaries which are not deemed appropriate for someone entering social work profession. The answer to being assaulted by bad words is not to end speech or to lock up the speaker. It is more speech. In the age of phony tolerance, we have reached the point where those of us who champion free speech as a fundamental value of our civilization can be excused of extremism. If there is one thing we should not tolerate in silence, it is the perversion of tolerance into an excuse for more self-defeating censorship. Pax Europa calls on participating states to ensure that citizens are free to exercise these fundamental freedoms without being labeled as intolerant. And finally, Pax Europa recommends to the OSCE that the terms tolerant and intolerant get precise legal definitions that do not in any way infringe on our fundamental freedoms. Thank you very much, Madam Moderator.
Thank you very much. I now turn to the Commonwealth of the Independent States, to be followed by the CJ Foundation.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. My name is Alexey Semenov. I am a political scientist, and I would like to raise the issue of discrimination of non-citizens. There is a serious gap between those rights that are guaranteed by international human rights law and the reality that non-citizens in the countries of residence are dealing with. In particular, almost all categories of non-citizens are affected by official and unofficial discrimination. The problem of non-citizens is especially acute in the two Baltic states, Latvia and Estonia. Non-citizens of Latvia and Estonia are persons who permanently live in one of these two countries, but are not citizens of Latvia and Estonia or any other country. The majority of non-citizens are former USSR citizens who lived in Latvia and Estonia and were deprived of the right to receive its citizenship after the collapse of the USSR. Non-citizens are deprived of most political rights, including the right to vote and run for national or European parliaments, and to participate in national referendums. They are restricted in their professional activities. They cannot work in law enforcement and public service. They are also restricted in social and economic rights. The process of naturalization and integration of non-citizens is extremely slow. Now, more than 25 years after the proclamation of the independence of the Baltic republics, the number of non-citizens in Latvia is about 12% of the total population and about 6% in Estonia. It should be noted that there have recently been certain efforts of the Estonian government to address this problem. For example, since 2016, children of non-citizens in Estonia began to receive Estonian citizenship from the moment of birth. Nevertheless, children of non-citizens in Latvia automatically receive the status of
May I
non-citizens,
kindly ask the speaker
despite
to
the fact
conclude?
that they were born in Latvia. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. I now turn to the CJ Foundation, to be followed by Public Union Kyrgyz Indigo.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. My name is Dave Petties, representing the CJ Foundation. Muslims complain constantly and bitterly about discrimination in the West. The CARE website even has a form you can fill out to report hate crimes of discrimination. The OIC has their Islamophobia observatory to tally these discrimination hate crimes, yet many turn out to be false. Article 1B of the Cairo Declaration states, "No one has superiority over another except on the basis of piety and good deeds." Does this not mean that non-believers are considered inferior to Muslims, who then have permission to discriminate against them? Article 2D of the Cairo Declaration also states safety from bodily harm is a guaranteed right. But the Quran says in Surah 47:4, "Therefore, when you meet the unbelievers in fight, smite their necks," or Surah 8:60, "Against them make ready your strength to the utmost of your power, including steeds of war, to strike terror into the hearts of the enemies." Or the famous Surah 9:5, "But when the forbidden months are past, then fight and slay the pagans wherever you find them." This is an undeniable theological link between Islam and jihad. Consider the 31,000 attacks since September 11, 2001, and the repeated calls by Muslim leaders for our destruction. Is this not an indication of hatred and discrimination against the West? The CJ Foundation recommends that the OSCE participating states study Islamic doctrine, recognize this apparent hypocrisy, and take a closer look at these Muslim claims of discrimination. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you very much. Regarding the former intervention, I would like to ask all participants to adhere to principles of tolerance and non-discrimination in line with OSCE commitments. I now turn to Public Union Kyrgyz Indigo, to be followed by ABTTF, Federation of Western Thrace Turks in Europe.
Thank you, moderator. I am representing Public Union Kyrgyz Indigo that is based in Kyrgyzstan, and I am presenting the statement on behalf of Public Union Kyrgyz Indigo and Labris to highlight the following critical issues concerning the human rights of lesbian, gay, bisexual, and trans people in Kyrgyzstan, focusing on discrimination and violence, discriminatory legislation, and hate crime perpetrated against these groups by various state and non-state actors. As civil society, we documented cases of corrective rape, family violence, and police violence, none of which is addressed by the government. A worrying trend is the discriminatory interaction with public officials, specifically police officers and border control staff. According to the research that was conducted by Kyrgyz Indigo in 2016, 84% of respondents indicated that they face physical violence. The existing legislation does not protect LGBT people from violence and discrimination. In 2014, the Parliament of Kyrgyzstan introduced a draft bill on formulating positive attitude towards non-traditional sexual relations. This draft bill is still in Parliament on the second reading. This draft law violates the rights of LGBT communities indeed. The draft law limits the freedom of speech, the freedom to search and share information, as well as the freedom of peaceful assemblies. Madam Chair, hate speech, incitement to violence and violence against LGBT people are on the rise in Kyrgyzstan. This is a direct consequence of discriminatory draft bills, negative publications in media, and ongoing impunity of actors. Currently, there are no regulations in the legal framework of Kyrgyzstan that would ensure accountability for hate speech in relation to LGBT communities. Madam Chair, we call upon all OSCE stakeholders to take all necessary steps and cooperate with the Kyrgyz government to ensure that all laws, policies and practices are in line with all commitments under the human dimension of the OSCE. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. I now turn to ABTTF, Federation of Western Thrace Turks in Europe, to be followed by Kazakhstan Feminist Initiative, Feminista.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Melek Kırmacıarık, ABTTF, representing the Turkish minority of Western Thrace in Greece. We share authors' comment that hate crimes are message crimes, a rejection of the victim's identity, which often has a marginalizing effect on the entire communities. Greece witnessed violations of fundamental rights, people through verbal abuse, physical attacks, or murders, motivated by prejudices with the rise of far-right extremist neo-Nazi Golden Dawn in Greece. And the U.S. International Religious Freedom Report for 2016 on Greece reported that there were incidents of anti-Semitic and anti-Islamic discrimination and hate speech. The Muslim Turkish community in Western Thrace, which is the only recognized minority by the Greek government as the Muslim minority in Thrace, has been a target of hate-motivated attacks in the past years. The US report noted that Golden Dawn attack during the anniversary death of the Turkish community's leader, Dr. Sadık Ahmet, last year, were participants of the Golden Dawn members in a demonstration, threw rocks and shouted racist slogans, "Turks are murderers." And recently, Vasilis Levendis, the president of the Central Union Party in Greece, as a response to the question related to the electoral system, addressed at the press conference held at the Thessaloniki International Trade Fair in September 2017, said that if the votes of the Muslim party were 5%, we would make then the threshold 5%, implying the Friendship, Equality, Peace Party, the political party of the Western Thrace Turkish community. And Levendis stated that since Muslims have a voting power, they wouldn't allow a Muslim party to enter into the parliament. Negative portrayals of and stereotype prejudices towards the Muslim Turkish community in the region create a general climate of mistrust, fear, and hostility. Audience should pay more and continuing attention to hate-motivated incidents and crimes against Muslims in the OSCE area. Thank you, Madam Moderator.
Thank you very much. I now turn to Kazakhstan Feminist Initiative, to be followed by Christian Evangelical Church, Temiztau? Temitau.
My name is Janar Sikirbaeva, and this statement is made on behalf of Kazakhstan Feminist Initiative Feminita, CUC Netherlands, and Transgender Initiative Almaty-Q. Our groups work on countering discrimination and hate crimes based on sexual orientation and gender identity. The Constitution of Kazakhstan includes a definition of discrimination which makes no mention of discrimination on the ground of sexual orientation and gender identity. The lack of legally bound normative definitions allows law enforcement authorities to interpret this constitutional provision as they see fit. OSCE participating states have agreed on developing a comprehensive approach to preventing and responding to hate crimes and discrimination, and supporting civil society in 4 OSCE Ministerial Council decisions as well as at its Bucharest Declaration. Madam Chair, trans people in Kazakhstan face intense social prejudice and discrimination. Bigotry on the part of police, healthcare staff and other officials can mean trans people have few, if any, places to turn for refuge or services. One of the most significant obstacles to the realization of the rights of trans people, including ensuring their protection from violence and discrimination, is the complexity of the legal and often humiliating procedure of recognition of their gender identity. Our research, furthermore, shows that LGBTQ women in 16 cities in Kazakhstan face regular police violence and indifference. Police officers do not accept reports from LGBTQ women mocking and humiliating them verbally and sometimes physically. Also, policemen use sexual orientation and gender identity of victims as a base for blackmail, not only towards LGBTQ, but also their parents. Madam Chair, we call upon all OSCE stakeholders to take necessary steps and cooperate with the Kazakhstani government to ensure that laws, policies and practices are in line with commitments under the human dimension of the OSCE. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I now turn to Christian Evangelical Church, Timitau, to be followed by Americans for America.
The Christian Evangelical Church in Kazakhstan. My name is Igor Andreiki, dear moderator, dear participants. The present law of the Republic of Kazakhstan that regulates religious activity is unfortunately still discriminatory with respect to a number of aspects of the human dimension. In particular, naming certain churches means that others are in a sort of a worse position, which amounts to discrimination. Some religious groups, for instance, the Muslim Ahadis and the Scientology Church, have not been able to register as religious organizations since 2011. In the new draft that has been proposed by the government of the Republic, there is a disproportionality in the punishments. For instance, in accordance with the administrative code for holding an illegal peaceful assembly, there is a fine set out for some 112 euros, but in the case of a religious group, it's 280. And when religious organizations hold ceremonies, if they're not registered, then the individuals concerned can be charged 1,120 euros or 1,693 euros, and their activity can be banned. So this is completely disproportionate when compared to secular assemblies. The difference here is 112 euros if it's non-religious and 1,120 euros if it is religious. To give you a sense of how high these fines are, let me mention that the minimal monthly wage is 61 euros. So this is fully disproportionate. And a number of other provisions in the law are discriminatory as well. So our recommendations would be to bring the level of punishments for these kinds of violations in line with the international standards and to have the overall legislation in line with international standards. Thank you.
To be followed by Azerbaijan.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. I am John Andrews, Chairman of Americans for America, a national citizens education project based in Denver, Colorado, USA. The annotated agenda for this session asks what more can be done to identify and protect the victims of hate crimes. We recommend that OSCE include in the definition of such crimes the brutality against women within patriarchal family structures where honor killings, domestic violence, and female genital mutilation claim a spurious religious exemption from fundamental norms of human dignity. The agenda asks how civil society can help with disaggregation of hate crime data according to specific bias motivation. Americans for America again recommend, as we did in Session 7, that OSCE take a lesson from George Orwell and courageously call things by their right names. A self-proclaimed jihadi attack like the Fort Hood massacre is not workplace violence. Jews murdered by Muslims in a Paris restaurant are not just some guys in a deli, as Barack Obama shamefully called them. Religion must never be used as a mask for political subversion and violent revolution. As Justice Robert Jackson, the Nuremberg prosecutor, reminded us, the Constitution is not a suicide pact. Finally, the agenda asks what challenges confront civil society groups working to combat hate crimes. We recommend that OSCE condemn such Marxist front organizations as the Southern Poverty Law Center, which use the hate label as an all-purpose devil word to silence legitimate dissent and intimidate truth-tellers, often including law-abiding, scrupulously nonviolent Christians, resulting in their social and economic ostracization. The Southern Poverty Law Center, regretfully, started as a hate watchdog. It has become a hate purveyor. Thank you.
Thank you very much. In regards to the previous intervention, I'd like to remind all participants to adhere to principles of tolerance and non-discrimination in line with OSCE commitments. I now turn to Azerbaijan, to be followed by European Center for Democracy Development.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Azerbaijan is a multi-ethnic and multi-confessional country. One cannot be surprised, of course, in our modern day by this, since most of the countries in the world are diverse in terms of religion and ethnicity. Interesting fact is that the people of different religious and ethnic background in Azerbaijan have been living here in an atmosphere of peace and mutual understanding for centuries. Just one example. Jewish people living among Muslim majority population never encountered anti-Semitism or any kind of hostility. It became possible as a result of deliberate and well-developed government policy. At the inception of independent Azerbaijan, it's constitutionally secular country where government holds equal distance to all religions and beliefs by not favoring or elevating any of them to the level of state or official religion. Nor it prohibits any religion or belief except those spreading hatred and discrimination against others. Institutional base is of ultimate importance to maintain and promote tolerance existing in the society. In 2001, State Committee on Religious Association has been established, which is in charge of state-religion relationship. Such entity is absent in most European countries. Moreover, just recently, the President of the Republic of Azerbaijan elevated the status of the Service of State Consular on Multiculturalism, Interethnic and Interreligious Affairs. Now it's a department in the President administration, and its head is direct assistant to the President of the Azerbaijan Republic. While government is not favoring any religion, almost every year it funds functioning of religious community. For example, in 2016, 300,000 USD allocated to Jewish community of Azerbaijan, as well as 400 USD have been allocated to different Christian communities. Moreover, Azerbaijan government is engaged in promotion of religious tolerance in the country and worldwide. Just last year, the State Committee on Religious Association initiated more than 300 seminars, training, and workshops on promoting tolerance and prevention of religious radicalism. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. I now turn to the European Center for Democracy Development, to be followed by IGCP, Information Group on Crimes Against the Person.
Thank you very much, Moderator. We would turn to the executive structures of the OSCE to take into consideration this draft law being prepared in Ukraine on education. In September of this year, the Ukrainian parliament adopted a law on education, which in fact prohibits education in any language other than Ukrainian. So that means that as of 2018, only in primary school will it be possible for people to be educated in other languages such as Hungarian, Russian, and others. And as of the fifth year of school, all education will be in Ukrainian. And now this really was not consulted with any of the national minorities. And this is very much in violation of Ukrainians' commitments under the Framework Convention on the Protection of National Minorities and various other documents, including the UNESCO document of 2002. Now, there have already been protests submitted by the President of Moldova, by the Hungarian authorities, and by Russian authorities. There is no law on regional languages, and there is the number of the percentage of minorities required in a certain region for the language there to be used as a language of education has been substantially increased. So this is sort of self-isolation, resulting in self-isolation. The children who are educated in a language that is not their mother tongue, they end up with a poorer education. This amounts, in fact, to ethnic cleansing, or turning citizens who are from a different ethnic group into secondary class citizens. And I would call on Ukraine to apply the recommendations of The Hague on education. Thank you.
Very much. I now turn to IGCP, Information Group on Crimes Against the Person, to be followed by Christlich Gemeinde des Wohnens Evangelismo Neues Leben. And if you don't know who I've just called out, please approach.
Добрый день, меня зовут Максим Вилков.
Maxim Velkov, I represent the Group of Information on Violence Against the Person. The bill on the status of participants in the Second World War deserves attention. Veterans are recognized only as those who are citizens. On the 18th of June 1944, the status of participants in the law only allows citizens of Latvia who in June 1994 were citizens and participated in military actions in any country. That includes anti-Hitler coalition countries and also pro-German groups. So the bill has two consequences. The status of veterans is given to all former collaborators, including Waffen-SS, Gestapo, and concentration camp workers. The status of veterans is also and payments, status of veteran and payments for veterans is not going to be given to non-citizens of Latvia who did fight against the Hitler coalition or moved to Latvia after the cut-off date. Now that affects the majority. So in our opinion, this situation is not acceptable, and that is why we call on the government of Latvia to change the bill, and we recommend the Council of Europe and the OSCE to keep an eye on the glorification of the accomplices of Nazism in Latvia. Thank you very much.
Slash, to be followed by Eurasia Partnership Foundation, EPF.
Добрый день, госпожа.
Good morning. The Christian community of Evangelical the New Life, and I'd like to draw attention to a case of discrimination. Important to note in Kazakhstan that there's a new bill on changes to existing acts of the Republic of Kazakhstan on the actions of religious organizations. It is discriminatory to such religious organizations. I particularly like to draw attention to the fact that it violates 18 provisions of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. The government says that nothing is being violated. They're applying best international practice. But if you look at the fines applied to religious organizations, they are more than 6 times higher than those applied to companies or individuals. For example, we see a case where there is a provision saying that religious organizations cannot accept minors without a letter signed by both parents or an accompanying parent. Today, where we see a terrifying rise in the number of youth suicides, how is it possible to help an individual who is in conflict with their parents, where that conflict is prompting them to go to the church? Young people fall into drug addiction, alcoholism, and they should have the opportunity to go to a house of prayer to get help. In adopting this law, the drafters did not think about making amendments that would ask for a signed letter by parents if a minor wants to participate in entertainment of an amoral nature. So the recommendation is to review the changes to the law and apply the international commitments to non-discrimination. Thank you.
Very much. I now turn to Eurasia Partnership Foundation, EPF, to be followed by Hungary.
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator. I am Anush Markaryan from Eurasia Partnership Foundation, an Armenian think and do tank, which with support of the Embassy of the Netherlands to Georgia and Armenia is involved in shaping human rights policies in the area of freedom of religion or belief and non-discrimination. Our recommendations to the government of Armenia go as follows. First, adopt a standalone, comprehensive anti-discrimination legislation in full line with international commitments of Armenia, explicitly mentioning sexual orientation and gender identity as protected grounds from discriminatory treatment. Second, revise the draft law regulating freedom of religion or belief in Armenia by bringing it into compliance with Armenia's international commitments and excluding provisions which are discriminatory or questionable in terms of rights of religious minorities and making it equally applicable to the activities of the Armenian Apostolic Church, a dominant church in Armenia. Third, introduce the definition of the hate speech by Armenian legislation and also provide adequate liability mechanisms. Last but not least, revise the textbook of the history of Armenian Church in Armenia by making the subject of history of Armenian Church mandatory subject, not mandatory, by opting it out, and also introducing alternative curriculum for children from religious minorities, and also eliminate indoctrination and preaching and religious ceremonies during lessons of history of Armenian Church. These were the main recommendations. The full list of recommendations with background information can be found in documentation distribution system. Thank you very much for attention.
Thank you very much. I now turn to Hungary to be followed by Association of Religious Organizations of Kazakhstan.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I align my statements to the statements delivered on the behalf of EU, but let me have some remarks in my nation capacity. The Hungarian National Social Inclusion Strategy is one of the basic strategies on fighting against poverty, social exclusion and inequality. The strategy focuses on people living in extreme poverty, poor children and Roma people. The key elements of the strategy are the complex approach and the cross-sector cooperation. The areas of intervention cover all the important areas from child welfare, education, employment, healthcare, housing, territorial cohesion, awareness raising, and fight against discrimination. There are civil society organizations, churches, municipalities, self-government of minorities involved in various public-funded inclusion programs. Cooperation and consultation with civil society has a great importance for us. There are several forums of partnerships operated under the governmental bodies such as Roma Coordination Council that has been working since 2011 to ensure a forum for dialogue and cooperation between governmental bodies, civil organizations and churches on measures aimed at strengthening the inclusion of Roma people. I also mentioned the Anti-Segregation Roundtable, which is comprised of professionals active in practice in the field of integrated education. Or last but not least, the Human Rights Roma subgroup with the main task of monitoring the assertion of human rights in Hungary. I am not able to represent all 145 measures of the strategy, but let me highlight some. A professional support system established in a legislative framework was set out to introduce a new system of preparing local equal opportunity plans. Nowadays, more than 3,100 municipalities have local equal opportunity plans. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I now turn to Association of Religious Organizations of Kazakhstan, to be followed by the International Society of Mezkitan Turks, Vatan.
Thank you. Thank you for giving me the floor. Now, when proper attention is not paid to tolerance and non-discrimination, this inevitably leads in a rise in tension in the society. As a consequence of this, in a number of OSCE participating states, we are seeing more and more new initiatives to change national legislation. And we can observe how some OSCE participating states, because they are moving away from international standards and commitments that they have taken on under the pretext of combating extremism and terrorism, there are gross violations of human rights in the area of freedom of religion being committed. Unfortunately, when national legislation is changed, there's not just certain violations of human rights, but also a discriminatory character. As we can see in the history of the world, when there is this pretext used to combat extremism and terrorism, this can result in a contrary effect, in fact. For example, today in Kazakhstan there are proposals to introduce changes in the law on religious activity and religious organizations. The proposed amendments, in our opinion and the opinion of international experts, are discriminatory and in many respects violate Article 18 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. And it's curious to note that the drafters of the amendments are referring to that very article, claiming that what they are proposing has been is in fact in line with those international standards. So our recommendation would be to the government of Kazakhstan that a special department be set up in the Ministry on Religion, on Religious Affairs, that would work on freedom of religion and combating discrimination, and that could result in a number of significant improvements being made. If such a department would set up, then maybe ODIHR could organize training for the staff of the department in order to show them how ensuring human rights and combating discrimination can be guaranteed. Thank you for your attention.
I now turn to the International Society of Mezkitan Turks, Vatan, to be followed by the Crimean Tatars community.
Спасибо, уважаемый модератор.
Thank you very much. I represent the International Society of Meskhetian Turks in the Russian Federation. Now, given today's subject, I would like to refer to discriminatory approaches to the Muslim community that was subject to deportation in the Second World War. The Meskhetian Turks were living in Georgia, but they were forcibly deported. Now, in the regional archives, it is very difficult to find any trace of the presence of the Muslim population in that territory, or at least if such documents are available, they are not made public. Now, at the local and the national levels, we see not a single issue kept of the publications in the Turkish and Azerbaijani languages that were read by that community. So there is very little trace left of the history of the Muslim community. Now, Georgia, because of its attempt to be integrationist and to homogenize its population, has put pressure on the population remaining, and the various myths and emotions are vehiculated in the media. It's worth remembering that the main theme applied when arguing in favor of repatriation was the ensuring an ethnic purity, if you will. And he would call on the bodies of the OSCE to pay due attention to these discriminatory actions. Thank you.
To be followed by the Evangelismus Freikirchen, Mittelpunkt.
Эльвин Кадыров, Crimean Tatars community. Мы крайне обеспокоены.
We are very worried by the discrimination and repression against the indigenous people of Crimea, including Tatars. The individuals who have suffered this have talked about the tortures that they have suffered. On the 13th of September, someone said, I was taken out with a bag on my head. I was subject to torture. They hit me, they beat me, and I screamed. I asked them to stop. I lost consciousness. I came round when they threw water over me. After that, I had injuries. I was in pain for 3 or 4 hours. After that, the Russian Federation security forces put me on my knees. They tied me up. They began to give me shocks, and then they poured something over me, some kind of liquid, and I wasn't able to resist. I said, it's enough, and they asked me to sign a confession which I had to show to my friends and anybody who I knew. I would call on the international community to recognize the repressive acts of the Russian Federation in Crimea at the moment. Thank you.
I now turn to the Evangelicus Freikirche Mittelpunkt, to be followed by Rights and Freedoms of Turkmenistan Citizens.
Conference participants, my name is Alexander Merkel. I represent the Free Evangelical Church of Braunschweig in Germany. Its participant countries of the OSCE have taken upon themselves the commitment to counteract discrimination with regard to religion. Last month, Kazakhstan submitted a bill, and you don't have to be an expert to see the anti-religious character of the bill, which is clearly discriminatory in character against faith communities and people of faith. It is repressive in nature and clearly not in line with the international commitments that Kazakhstan has taken upon itself when ratifying the International Covenant of Civil and Political Rights. The bill has provisions such as forbidding the preaching of dogma or teachings outside religious organizations. This clearly is impossible for any representative of a religious organization, because this is what they do. They preach their beliefs, they bear witness to their teachings, and anybody who professes the faith of their religion will talk about it on occasions such as marriages, baptisms, etc. So this is clearly a discriminatory provision. There is no doubt that we're seeing the state institutes participating in religious life, crossing the line into controlling religious organizations. We would recommend that Kazakhstan reviews its repressive policy towards religious organizations. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now turn to the Rights and Freedoms of Turkmenistan Citizens, to be followed by Turkmenistan Helsinki Foundation for Human Rights.
Thank you, moderator. I would like to say a few words about one of the most extreme cases of open discrimination by a national authority. I'm referring to a minority that is whose rights are completely ignored. There is a manipulation of the democratic standards, and that has resulted in a usurpation of power and authority. But the material cultural heritage is not something that can be changed or destroyed by a single tyrant. We're talking about a heritage that is of great significance internationally. After illegal confiscation of my property, I was convened to the Ministry of International Affairs, where police officers are responsible for combating organized crime. They warned me that on 17 November 2013, I would not have the right even to speak over the telephone, to be in contact with any horses or horse traders. You yourself know who is the main horse trader in our country. Look at the television, it's the president, so you cannot be involved in raising horses and trading in them. That is part of our tradition. I mean, you don't need to be a politician to understand that preserving the symbols of state, the tradition of state, is extremely important. And in Turkmenistan, I mean, the raising of a certain breed of horses, and the dictator in power claims that he is the only one who can do this properly. But this really is just a process of destruction of our material cultural heritage. Thank you for your attention.
To Turkmenistan Helsinki Foundation for Human Rights, to be followed by Religious Society Path of Guru Jara.
Спасибо, госпожа модератор.
Thank you very much indeed. The equality of all peoples and religions of the country is important, but particularly Jews are having difficulties. People wouldn't leave the country if they weren't forced to do so. Anti-Semitism is a very alarming question. There's not a single synagogue. We have had strong traditions, but we're seeing these falling apart. I, as a Jew, have had to suffer confiscation. The general prosecutor has said that he's officially married to my situation is that after we left the country, we came across anti-Semitic articles, including accusations of incest. And at the moment, there are very few Jews left in the country. They're having to leave because they don't see a future for themselves or their children. The conditions are unbearable with the confiscation. There are people who are Jews who gave their life for the development of Turkmenistan, and they are suffering today.
Thank you very much. I now turn to the Religious Society Path of Guru Yara, to be followed by the Holy See.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. My name is Martin Krajča, and I'm speaking on behalf of Religious Society Path of Guru Yara. I would like to bring attention to the situation in the Czech Republic, the 7 years of persecution of Czech Religious Society Path of Guru Yara and religious minority. We have these recommendations to ODR. Please help us and provide assistance to the Czech Republic to fulfill its commitments from a ministerial council decision from 2009, as well Basel Declaration from 2014, mainly in reference to hate crimes towards religious minorities. To Czech Republic, according to ministerial council decision from 2009, we are calling for independent and proper investigation of various hate crimes committed on members of religious minority Path of Guru Yara since 2010. We are calling for remedy of our serious situation in the Czech Republic, situation that has been exposed and referred to by experts on national and international law, by domestic and international human rights organization and Office of International Religious Freedom USA. In 2010, we have experienced damaging police raids targeting and hitting key church representatives in the Czech Republic, officially based on allegation on human trafficking. This impeachment has never reached any further, being based on false accusations. However, in 2011, police spread the fabrication accusation illegally of human trafficking over Czech media, which made these shocking accusations infamously known to the country. All those unverified rumors in media and society create extreme hostile, intolerant and discriminatory environment towards all members of the path of Guru Yara, which mean hundreds of mostly university-educated people from socially valued positions. We are peacefully asking once again for establish a dialogue to solve this complex and discriminative situation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I now turn to the Holy See, to be followed by Armenia.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. The Holy See underlines again that all forms of religious intolerance and discrimination need to be carefully identified and addressed, avoiding any improper selectivity or hierarchical approach. Furthermore, OSCE commitments on hate crimes have highlighted a series of issues to which the Holy See would welcome further attention: assistance to victims of hate crimes, training for law enforcement and the judiciary in responding to and dealing with such crimes, as well as the positive and important role political and other public leaders may play in drawing attention to hate crime and advancing preventive efforts. Our delegation has one recommendation to present: that participating states and ODIHR should advance efforts to ensure training for law enforcement and the judiciary about the consensually agreed OSCE commitments on hate crimes. As there's a little time left, just to state that the representative of civil society spoke of the lacking inclusion of information from the Holy See on biased motivated crimes against Christians, on which the Holy See is a major source. But that is an issue I'm happy to take up with ODIHR bilaterally. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I now turn to Armenia, to be followed by the Center for Security Policy.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. We agree with the assumption of annotated agenda that hate crime is a message to the society. In this sense, hate crimes come close to terrorism, since both of these crimes aim at spreading fears and mobilizing certain groups against common enemy, which they single out by their violent actions. That being said, let me also stress that hate crimes come in different scope and entail different security threats. And it is important to have differentiated approach, both in deconstructing motives of hate crimes and addressing needs of victims. We think that the OSCE should pay particular attention to those hate crimes which may seriously endanger peace and security and create an environment of large-scale identity-based violence. OSCE commitments, particularly those undertaken in Athens in 2009, provide an important framework for fighting hate crimes. It puts forward the responsibility of participating states in deconstructing hate narratives and motivation by calling on all participating states to promptly investigate hate crimes and ensure that the motives of those convicted of hate crimes are acknowledged and publicly condemned by the relevant authorities and by political leadership. Unfortunately, there have been notable hate crimes in OSCE, along with notable breaches of this commitment, as certain political leaderships not merely justified but glorified hate crimes. In this regard, strong involvement of the ODIHR in raising awareness on notable hate crimes and inviting participating states and their political leadership to take actions along with their commitments is essential. While acknowledging systematic work of ODIHR in fighting hate crimes, we also see a need of better division of labor with Council of Europe ECRI in order to put more efforts in addressing high-profile and notable hate crimes in the OSCE area. I thank you.
Thank you very much. Apologies. We move now to the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, Kiev Patriarchate, to be followed by the International Platform, Global Rights of Peaceful People. So again, the next speaker will be Ukrainian Orthodox Church, Kiev Patriarchate. Yes, we will give this speaker a second to make his way, as the previous speakers have left the room and will be at the end of the speaker list.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. In the past few days, this room was filled with a lot of negative information about Ukraine. However, I would like to recall the excellent example of fruitful cooperation between Orthodox, Catholics and Protestants, as well Jews and Muslims, united in the Ukrainian Council of Churches and religious organizations. Despite of all the differences between them, 18 organizations on equality basis successfully have been cooperating for more than 20 years. Our church has always adhered to the position of openness for dialogue and cooperation with other institutions of civil society. Thanks to this, we have fruitful cooperation in Ukraine with the Catholic churches, the main Protestant churches, the religious centers of Jews and Muslims. Despite the fact that Kyiv Patriarchate is the largest church in Ukraine, united more than 40% of believers, Moscow Patriarchate less than 20%. We are always open to fruitful cooperation with all organizations that share the values of peaceful coexistence and respect for the dignity of the individuals. Unfortunately, over the past more than 25 years, our church has been constantly exposed at the national and international levels to systematic defamation by the Moscow Patriarchate and the Russian Federation. Into thousands of books, articles and speeches, in sermons and official documents, our brothers in faith continue to use against us the language of hatred, and at the same time they declare themselves a victim of aggression and unreasonably refuse any form of positive dialogue. We has never denied the right of the Moscow Patriarchate to exist, while the Moscow Patriarchate completely denies our very right to exist. Despite this, we are sure that the period of described above systematic defamation will end, and will we able to establish a good relations with the Russian Church, and we will be grateful to all individuals and organizations, including the OSCE, who can help bring this moment closer. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now turn to the international platform, Global Rights of Peaceful People, to be followed by the Barnabas Fund.
Thank you, Madam Moderator, dear experts. I'm the president of the International Platform Global Rights of Peaceful Peoples. My name is Sergei Marchel. I was elected at a convention in Aachen, and our organization has existed since 2014. And we function on the basis of contributions by ordinary citizens who receive no governmental money. Now, the objective is to protect the rights of peaceful peoples of different religious groups. Most of our adherents are Orthodox Christians, but the full text of the declaration can be found on the site. But let me come immediately to the recommendations. We would recommend to the OSCE to prevent the Ukraine to prevent Ukraine from adopting the draft laws on religion, which are completely in violation of freedom of religion principles, and we believe that a commission of experts should be set up to assess those texts. But recommendations can be given only to governments or ombudsmen who are not interested in that. So we would call upon the OSCE to try to change the situation in order that recommendations of civil society can be taken into consideration by the OSCE without consultation with the government. And we think that that could result in the victory of democracy. We here in the session are turning to you, giving recommendations, but they can only be implemented if the government supports them. But why can't we just tell the governments that we don't need them, their comments are not necessary, and that we should go immediately to implementation? Thank you.
By Social Action Center.
Mark Green, Barnabas Fund. We remain concerned about restrictions on religious freedom in parts of Central Asia. We therefore request that Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan and Turkmenistan review their performance in the area of religious freedom to respect their constitutional provisions and their obligations under the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. Under international norms of human rights, the state does not have the right to require registration in order to legally practice or share one's religion, although registration of groups is voluntary in many countries in order to obtain tax exemption or other state benefits. All three countries have ratified the ICCPR, but they do not follow its norms. Kazakhstan has human rights and freedom of religion theoretically protected by the constitution, but these protections are widely ignored in fact. The judiciary is not independent, but it is controlled by the government, while maintaining a facade of democracy, but it has become increasingly autocratic. In 2005, new laws banned all activities by unregistered religious groups and allowed the government to ban any groups it deemed extremists. In 2008, the lower chamber of parliament initiated further restrictive legislation, which came into force in 2011. Among things, the law laid down strict rules for how many members a religious organisation must have to gain registration. Kyrgyzstan has a State Commission on Religious Affairs, established in 1996. All religious organisations must be registered by this SCRA. In 2009, the new law on religion introduced tighter controls on registration of religious groups, demanding 200 signatures from members in order for a church or other group to be granted legal registration. In Turkmenistan, similar issues prevail. The full details of this statement will be available on the website. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now turn to the Social Action Center, to be followed by Human Rights Educational Center.
Thank you. My name is Elena Bondarenko. I'm from Social Action Center, Ukraine. Protection from discrimination and bias violence serves to ensure that everyone is able to exercise their rights freely and without fear. When xenophobia and violence are manifested, the state must be the first to respond. In this regard, we recommend that Ukrainian authorities ensure unconditional and meaningful implementation of the National Human Rights Strategy 2020, include sexual orientation and gender identity into the list of protected characteristics in accordance with its requirements. Other components for prevention of discrimination should be implemented in full. Inform persons affected by hate violence about outcomes of investigation in these cases. Improve cooperation with civil society organizations and communities. Provide victims with effective access to justice and encourage them to report hate crimes. Develop and conduct comprehensive professional training for law enforcement and ensure that all hate crimes are recognized and condemned by the state authorities. First, action plan for the implementation of the National Human Rights Strategy has an obligation to include penalty for offenses motivated by bias against race, skin color, religious beliefs, sexual orientation, transsexuality, disability, and language. These should be implemented and in due time. Second, despite increased monitoring efforts, investigation of hate crime in Ukraine remains ineffective. Threats and attacks against participants of assemblies for equality, violence against Roma, cases of vandalism should receive proper recognition, attention, and resources for investigation. Last, in August, the National Police launched a special operation titled Operation Migrant, targeting citizens of other countries. Sadly, such operations are regularly implemented by Russian Federation authorities as well. Dissemination of hate speech, and I quote, ethnic criminality, illegal migrants by the Ministry of Interior is unacceptable and should be condemned by the leadership of the law enforcement bodies. Last, we look forward to cooperating with the state, national and international partners to promote the rights of hate crime victims and improve response to hate crime. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now turn to Human Rights Educational Center, to be followed by Public Union, Civil Movement April.
Thank you. Уважаемые участники, уважаемые
Participants, moderator, we see discrimination as all violation of the dignity of humans or nations. Poland is asking Germany for compensation. Belarus could do the same thing. Today, attention is focused on Poland, the discrimination of the administration. We in Belarus should be able to ask Poland for compensation for years of discrimination against Belarusians from 1996 onwards, when the Polish administration publicly banned the use of Belarusian language, which had a detrimental effect. They wanted to attack the root of the Belarusian nation. The financing of students and the channel Belsat are two further examples. Belsat is in Belarusian language, but not in Belarus. So compensation for discrimination against Belarusians is not being given. We recall the concentration camp for Belarusians, which existed prior to the Second World War, and further abuses such as the creation of fuel for rockets and other many cases of abuse and discrimination. We believe that we have the right for compensation. Does Poland have the moral right to ask Germany for compensation if Poland itself fails to compensate for the repression of the Belarusian people?
I now turn to Public Union, Civil Movement April, to be followed by Political Movement Group 24.
Thank you very much. Уважаемые
Ladies and gentlemen, in the OSCE, the human rights orientation within participating states is subject to orbital gravitational movements, and I think it can be said that there are some positive measures when it comes to protecting the rights of minorities and majorities. But there are certain phobia that arise in the interaction between the minorities and the majority. We're discussing tolerance here. Now, in Kyrgyzstan, we not only apply tolerance, we also apply liberalism. In what sense? I mean, it's a bit of a philosophical concept, and we find very successful solutions. For instance, the Russian language is officially identified as an official language. As for religions, well, we have a special body that registers all faiths that are practiced on the territory of the Republic. And so we have find a way of combining, of complementing the interests of the minorities and the majority. And I think that the OSCE could look not just at tolerance as a concept, but also combine this with this philosophical approach of liberalism in order to improve the relations between minorities and the majority. Thank you for your attention.
Movement Group 24, to be followed by Independent Human Rights Organization of Uzbekistan.
Здравствуйте, уважаемые дамы.
Ladies and gentlemen, Savada Fiatulzion. I'm representative of the political movement Group 24 and the young people of Tajikistan. Unfortunately, there are measures which are being applied in countries of the third world related to intolerance of race and religion, and that is giving rise to the dissemination of ills such as terrorism. And my country does suffer particularly from discrimination. In Tajikistan, it's really in the very vertical of power, which tries to extend control throughout the whole country. the current rulers of the country belong to the clan of the president, and it's not possible for any other ethnic majority to occupy any high post. After years of discrimination by the ruling clan, we see their grip on power becoming stronger and stronger, and the denial of the rights for others is getting worse and worse. This applies, for example, when you look at the offences related to clothing, to beards, and other examples. The intolerant policies in Tajikistan are a cause for growth of extremism and pushes individuals towards terrorist organizations in the Middle East. So our movement is asking the international community to pay very close attention to the violation of human rights in Tajikistan and the necessary changes that need to be made. And you can see, we hope very much, we will make this statement available. Thank you.
I now turn to Independent Human Rights Organization of Uzbekistan, followed by Set My People Free.
I'm the president of the Independent Human Rights Organization of Uzbekistan. My name is Amadalov. I would like to mention the fact that within our republic we have more than 100 national minorities and a lot of religions, of course. There is essentially peaceful coexistence amongst them, but there have been some violations of Muslims by the authorities. If men wear beards or women dress in Muslim dress, they are not able to be employed, so there are difficulties in this respect. But those who wear beards, I mean, some people were arrested and fined just for the fact that they had beards. But when they got in touch with us, with our organization, we did manage to have these fines lifted, to have them annulled. But we have had a process of change over the spring and the summer, and in more than 1,000 cases when there were religiously based decisions that was overturned. There were some refusals to grant passports for foreign travel, but I would stress that NGOs need support thanks to the work of the OSCE, which is active in the country, and I would thank in particular the Polish embassy that assisted us in obtaining a visa to come here. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. I now turn to Set My People Free, to be followed by Tolerance and Diversity Institute.
My name is Kamal Fahmi, speaking in behalf of Set My People Free. Tolerance without critical and analytic thinking is censorship and leads to suppression. Tolerance without truth and common sense lead to relativism and an end to the rule of law. Relativism, intolerance, is the greatest enemy to freedom, equality, and justice. Logic teaches that we cannot say both Mother Teresa and Hitler are good. For sure, one is good and the other is bad. The assumption that all cultures are equally right is wrong. For sure, there is good and bad cultures or ideologies. I give you an example. In India, they used to burn the wife with her husband when he dies. I don't think many women will like to be there, burned alive with the husband. Or in Papua New Guinea, they will have you for dinner and keep you in the past, and they will keep your head, your skull as a trophy. If we say relative is right, then we cannot say there is good and bad constitution. Driving will be very dangerous if the traffic law is relative. If every man does what is right in his own eyes, there will be no society or community or rule of law. There will be no justice or freedom. Truth, common sense, and mercy are crucial to build society based on freedom, equality, and justice. Tolerance without these values, it leads to anarchy. Therefore, it is crucial there should be not any ideology or culture or belief immune.
May I kindly ask the speaker to conclude?
Okay, the last sentence. Therefore, it is crucial there should not be any ideology, culture, or belief immune to scrutiny, critical or analytic thinking.
Thank you very much. I now turn to Tolerance and Diversity Institute, to be followed by Center for Security Policy. At this point, I would also give a kind reminder to delegations interested in exercising the right of reply to please see my colleagues behind me. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Mariam Ghavtadze. I represent Georgian civil society organization Tolerance and Diversity. Today I would like to speak about xenophobia, racism, and hate crimes in Georgia. The state policy towards the crimes committed against non-dominant religious groups is ineffective. The instances of violence motivated by religious intolerance and hatred has increased during the last years. The incidents against Jehovah's Witnesses involve verbal and physical abuse, interference with religious rights, damage of literature, damage of kingdom halls, and so on. Investigation of alleged violations, physical and verbal abuse, threats, creation of obstacles to conduct religious rites against Muslims committed since 2012 are not completed yet. The investigations are still ongoing without granting the status of victim to anyone or identification of the accused person. Or in some cases, investigation is not launched at all. State does not fulfill its obligation to address these cases adequately. On the other hand, sometimes state directly participates in persecution and violation of minorities' rights. For example, state dismantled minaret from the mosque in the village Chela, and police physically abused Muslims protesting demolition of former mosque by the state, and so on. State policy towards foreigners, especially from African and Asian countries, has become discriminatory. After studying the cases, TDI, my organization, considers that the discrimination is often allegedly based on race and country of origin. State does not issue or prolong residence permits to people from these countries with the argument that these people are a threat to state security. However, they do not give any further evidence to support this decision.
May I kindly ask the speaker to conclude?
Yeah, I would conclude that state's approach helps to strengthen extremist xenophobic groups in the country, and the state policy has to change to decrease xenophobia in the country.
Thank you very much. I now turn to the Center for Security Policy, to be followed by the Youth Movement Magam Institute for Reporters' Freedom and Society.
Thank you. I'm Claire Lopez with the Center for Security Policy, here to offer this meeting of the Human Dimension Implementation Meeting and the OSCE a challenge and an opportunity. Citing from your meeting annotated agenda for this year, I focus on the following priority: ensuring equal enjoyment of rights and equal protection in public and political life. As we've noted before, the elevation of the individual as the key of society with equality and human dignity for each and every person is a cherished principle of Western civilization. The absolute equality of all persons before the rule of man-made law is the foundation of other rights and freedoms, for if we are all equal one with the other, then none rightfully may rule or another except by consent freely given, and all are granted the same rights and the same liberties, but also share the same obligations before the law. Understanding that the Organization of Islamic Cooperation chose with its 1990 Cairo Declaration to abrogate the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights in favor of acknowledging only such rights as might be accorded under Islamic law, the OSCE therefore has a significant challenge before it and an opportunity. The challenge to acknowledge, to confront the painful reality that under Sharia, Muslims and non-Muslims are not equal. Men and women explicitly are unequal under the law of Islam. There has never been slavery or sex slavery banned, knowing that Islamic law allows polygamy and marriage of little girls, etc., FGM. So here is the challenge. Your opportunity, OSCE, by confronting such difficult realities, this exceptional organization has the chance to blaze an international pathway to truly championing the rights of women, children, the victims of genocide and enslavement, gays and lesbians, all who today in the 21st century still face inequality and oppression under the horrors of Sharia. OSCE, the challenge, opportunity are yours.
Thank you very much. In regards to the last speaker, I would like to ask all participants to adhere to principles of tolerance and non-discrimination in line with the OSCE commitments. I now turn to Youth Movement Magam Institute for Reporters, Freedom and Society. If you are in the room, can you please raise your hand? I think you may not be in the room. Very well then. At this point, we've reached the end of the speakers list, and I'm moving to the right of reply. Right of reply, I have Greece, to be followed by Kazakhstan. Greece, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. In reply to two more statements about the situation in Greece, which bring the total number of repetitive ad nauseam interventions by the same three organizations to 12 for this year's HDIM and counting, I would like to stress the following. During the last years, we have developed a robust legislative and operational framework against racism, hate crimes, and hate speech. We are encouraged that the accomplished so far has been recognized by all human rights mechanisms. The region of Thrace is an example of successful living together of a Christian majority and a Muslim minority. Any incident which may or may not be identified as hate crime is thoroughly investigated. However, gratuitous insinuations about a quote-unquote suspicious fire in a historic mosque, despite the fact that according to the investigation it was due to an accident during restoration works, and despite the commitment expressed by the authorities to restore the damage as soon as possible, speak volumes about the fanaticism and lack of credibility of those who disseminate them. Thank you, Madam Moderator.
Thank you very much. Delegations are reminded we have 1 minute. For right of reply, it will be a generous 1 minute at this point. I move now to Kazakhstan, to be followed by France.
Спасибо.
Thank you. Responding to the representative of France, the right to participate in a religion is a right that is applied equally to citizens in our country. There are no limitations. It's only necessary to agree with foreigners who wish to lead for religious organizations in our country. So, with regard to specific extremists, I don't think it's appropriate to raise the question, given the questions of the radicalization. One of the many religions in Kazakhstan is typical. We have equal rights for all religions. We have questions on how to raise complaints against individuals, but that is something that is carried out in accordance with the law. There is the question of Jehovah's Witnesses, which I believe we've already referred to. With regard to Protestant organizations, I trust it's necessary to look at the new version of the provisions relating to religious organizations in Kazakhstan, where religious organizations' rights and citizens' rights are protected.
I turn now to France, to be followed by Georgia.
Merci. Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to respond to what was said by the European Centre for Law and Justice. After the adoption of the Marriage for All law, we became the 14th country in the world that allows for the marriage of homosexuals. Now, mayors are not just elected officials, they are also agents of the state, and they duty bound to apply the law without discrimination and in full neutrality. A mayor cannot refuse to marry homosexuals, foreigners, or divorced persons. This is the mayor is not celebrating the marriage as a private person, but as a public official. Nevertheless, the Constitutional Court, which is the highest judicial organ in the land, has decided that a mayor who has a conscientious objection can delegate the holding of this celebration to a deputy. Now, insofar as abortion is concerned, since 1975, the right to abortion is a fundamental right for all women in France, and the guarantee of sexual and reproductive rights is very important for equality between men and women, and France will continue to promote that. Thank you.
I turn now to Georgia, to be followed by the Czech Republic.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Georgia has already accomplished all commitments undertaken upon its accession to the Council of Europe to facilitate the process of repatriation. In their recent information note declassified on 16th of June, the co-reporters of Monitoring Committee of the Council of Europe Parliamentary Assembly have positively assessed the steps undertaken by the Georgian authorities regarding the repatriation of FTPs, including an elaboration of legal framework and a comprehensive repatriation strategy. They consider the obligation largely honored by the Georgian authorities within their competence. Moreover, the co-reporters note that the obstacles facing the applicants are outside of what can be reasonably considered the responsibility of the Georgian authorities. Government of Georgia ensures that the rights of minorities are fully respected. With this in mind, anti-discrimination law was adopted, the purpose of which is to eliminate all forms of discrimination in public and private sector and ensure equal enjoyment of rights for everyone prescribed by law irrespective of any ground. Any form of discrimination, being direct, indirect, or multiple, is prohibited in Georgia. Under the law, temporary special measures intended to accelerate de facto equality, especially in gender, pregnancy, and maternity issues, also with respect to persons with limited capabilities, shall not be considered discrimination. The law vests the authority to monitor its implementation with the Public Defender's Office. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I turn now to the Czech Republic, to be followed by the Russian Federation.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. This is a short reply to the statement of Religious Society Pass of Guru Jara. In the Czech Republic, the freedom of religious belief, tolerance, and non-discrimination are safeguarded by the Constitution, and a limitation to such freedoms are prescribed by law and necessary in a democratic society in the interest of public safety, for the protection of public order, health, or moral, or for the protection of the rights and freedoms of others. They are fully in line with our international obligation. Moreover, the Czech Republic actively promotes non-discrimination, including the protection of religious minorities. I thank you.
Thank you very much. I turn now to the Russian Federation, to be followed by the United Kingdom.
Благодарю, госпожа модератор. В связи с высказыванием...
Thank you very much. In accordance with the violation of individuals' rights of non-traditional sexual orientation of the Chechen Republic in recent time, in the OSCE bodies, we've reported on this matter at least 5 times. I'd recall that not a single specific case of persecution of indication of non-traditional sexual orientation in this region has been identified, and all accusations are baseless. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much. I turn now to the United Kingdom, to be followed by Latvia.
Thank you, Madam Moderator.
As one of the participating states that freely signed up to the OSCE commitments referenced in the annotated agenda, I would like to use my right of reply to respond to some of the statements made earlier in relation to Islam and hate crime. These sessions have also given me cause to recall George Orwell. Orwell believed in the moral power of language and understood the dangers that accompany its corruption. In his masterpiece, 1984, we were introduced to the daily 2-minute hate, in which party members are required to express their hatred for the party enemies for exactly 2 minutes. I cannot but note with sadness the parallels with some of the 2-minute interventions we have heard here today. As I said yesterday, just as we will not stand for those who pervert Islam to preach extremism, neither will we stand for groups who try to demonize Islam and stoke up anti-Muslim hatred. We remain fully committed to the OSCE principles of tolerance and non-discrimination. Finally, the UK has one of the strongest legislative frameworks in the world to protect communities from hostility, violence and bigotry. Since 2016, we've collected disaggregated data to include hate crimes against individuals based on individual religions. This data will be included in the next UK report to ODIHR. And if this is a generous 1 minute, I would also like to thank the introducers and you, Madam Moderator, for your work in chairing this session fairly and without bias. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now move to Latvia, to be followed by Ukraine.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to reply to remarks made by civil society representatives towards Latvia. There are different groups of residents living in Latvia. Latvia's citizens, non-citizens, stateless persons, third country nationals, refugees. Latvia's citizenship legislation corresponds to the generally accepted principles of democracy and human rights, and it was enhanced into account recommendations of international human rights as UN, Council of Europe and OSCE. The position of Latvian authorities regarding the granting voting rights to the local elections to non-citizens is firm. The rights to vote is an integral part of citizenship. Next, in the general note, let me remind to all of you that during and after the Second World War, Latvia greatly suffered under occupation of 2 regimes, the Soviet and Nazi. Latvian authorities constantly condemned all crimes against humanity committed to both totalitarian regimes. The mentioned amendments to the law are aimed to the reconciliation of society. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now turn to Ukraine, to be followed by Poland.
With deep sadness, the Ukrainian delegation can observe as the representatives of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church under jurisdiction of the Moscow Patriarchate and its proxies completely correlate and synchronize their messages with the different representatives of the Russian Federation. It confirms once again that this church has become a part of the general ideological strategy aimed at implementation the main idea of so-called Russian world and the hybrid war against Ukraine, particularly and the principles of the liberal society in general. Any changes of the jurisdictional affiliation of the Orthodox community are occurring according to the Article 8 of the national law and OSCE recommendations on the basis of the decision of the majority of community members. So, in fact, the openly expressed different representatives of the Moscow Patriarchate rejection of the possibility for free choice, for religious affiliation and beliefs in general is an obvious expression of the totalitarian way of thinking and denial of the liberal principles. This approach is especially dangerous because it intends to mask the real intention of returning to the repressive past, addressing and using at the same time mechanisms that offer by the international democratic institution. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now turn to Poland, to be followed by Kyrgyzstan, and that's the last delegation in terms of right of reply. So if any other delegations would like right of reply, please come see us.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. I would like to reply to the statement by the Russian Federation representative who mentioned Poland. I would like to stress that the Polish law on prohibition of propagating communism or other totalitarian systems, that combating attempts to promote any totalitarian ideologies, and we are strongly committed to combating hate crimes and condemn totalitarian ideologies, particularly through adopting proper legal instruments in this regard. And answering to the concerns of the Russian delegation, I would like to stress that the law applies to the objects located in, for example, in cemeteries or which are included in the Register of Monuments. And with regard to the rights of the Belarusian minority in Poland, I would just like to stress that our law on national minorities provides for a right to education to all minorities in Poland in their own language, and the Belarusian community enjoys the same rights as all other minorities. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now have Kyrgyzstan to be followed by Armenia.
Thank you, moderator. Now, we have heard some comments about Kyrgyzstan, and in fact, the information provided was not reliable. Insofar as religious organizations in my country are concerned, the law is one of the most liberal ones that you can imagine. It is not strict. There is a guarantee of freedom of conscience and of religious belief. This is a law that we adopted back in 1990. It provides for registration of religious organizations, and on the basis of cooperation between our state and the religious organizations, the law in fact functions very well, and you can find more complete information about this in the statement that I delivered yesterday, and that is available on the site. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now have Armenia to be followed by Canada.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. We took note of the recommendations put forward by an NGO, Eurasian Cooperation Foundation. We also took note that these recommendations, including adoption of law addressing sexual identities and sexual orientation, have been substantiated by Armenia's OSCE commitments. As an initial reaction, I would like to state that there are no OSCE commitments on sexual identities and orientation. That being said, let me stress that anti-discrimination is ensured in Armenia by constitution and relevant legislation. I thank you.
Thank you very much. I now have Canada, and that is the last delegation I have for right of reply, so please come see us if you wish to exercise it.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. I'd like to use our right of reply to once again express Canada's sincere disappointment to once again have heard a number of speakers use the floor in this session on tolerance and non-discrimination to express intolerance and discrimination towards certain religious and belief groups, in this session notably Islam, cherry-picking examples and subjective interpretations to support their intolerant views. Just as we would not accept participating states espousing these kinds of views at HDIM, we should not accept such messages of intolerance from civil society groups, and we thank you, Madam Moderator, for having responded throughout the session to some of these interventions espousing intolerant views. I'd also like to take this opportunity to reaffirm Canada's view that universal and indivisible human rights include the human rights of LGBTI persons, and we thank the various participating states and civil society groups that highlight the challenges LGBTI persons face in participating states of the OSCE. Earlier this year, the Government of Canada publicly expressed its strong concern following reports of the persecution of gay and bisexual men in Chechnya. Together with 23 other countries of the Equal Rights Coalition, we have called on the Russian authorities to thoroughly investigate these reports and to immediately ensure the safety of all persons in Chechnya at risk due to their sexual orientation. No credible investigation has taken place, and the LGBT community in Chechnya remains vulnerable. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was the last right of reply. We are now in the... Switzerland.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. May I just briefly state on behalf of Switzerland that we subscribe to the statements made by the UK delegation and Canada in their rights of reply relatively to the content of some of the statements we have heard today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Does any other delegation wish to exercise the right of reply? In that case, we happily have time to turn back to our introducers for a 1 to 2 minute wrap-up of the session. Caroline, may I turn back to you?
Okay, thank you very much. Well, just two very short ideas. We have seen here that there are many actors fighting against hate crime, no, and also promoting tolerance, no, civil society, police, judicial operators, and many others, educators, civil servants, institutions, organizations, well, for us, collaboration and cooperation between all these partners really is essential to make the fight against hate crime successful. But it makes also some other thing very important, which is our society more resilient in crisis situations, and I think this is also important. And the other idea is that having reliable and detailed information on hate crime provides us with a description of what is going on and allows us to define the best strategies to protect victims, which are our final objective. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Fiaz, may I turn to you?
Thank you very much. So there's three things that came out of the discussions for me here, and I think I just wanted to, in a way, repeat some of these issues that were raised by others. I was quite concerned, actually, with some of the statements that wanted to take away the very basis of the victim's voice from work around hate crime. What do I mean by that is some individuals said, well, you know, basically speech can be free for all. There's a free for all ability, and that actually the market forces of ideas should win out. Well, the reality is not that. The reality is simply not that. And sometimes bad things can win out in debates. And the fact of the matter is, if we say that there should not be recourse for a victim and justice and their voice, then we're on a very, very slippery slope. First thing. The second thing is, and just to reiterate this, there are views here that suggested and co-opted, not even suggested, co-opted the fact that fundamental rights such as free speech are essential. I think we all agree with that. Then went on to say that certain religions should be curtailed. Well, just to reinforce what the UK delegation said here, again, it doesn't work that way. You can't co-opt certain values and then use them against other religious groups. I think we need to repeat that within the context of the human rights framework. And last but not least, there are certain speakers who decided they want to cherry pick certain religious texts. Well, that's exactly what the extremists do. They cherry pick certain texts, but on the other side, individuals cherry pick certain texts to reaffirm their exclusion of people of a certain belief. It's exactly what the extremists and jihadis do, and I'll leave you with that thought, because the context around religious text is devoid by these individuals and those who seek to curtail the rights of others. And I think that's a fundamental misuse of the ability of free speech and the right of free speech, not the ability, the right of free speech. Thank you.
Thank you very much. At this point, I would like to thank our speakers very much for being with us today. Thank the audience for a robust debate. As usual, thank the translators for all of their hard work into translating the speeches and interventions today. Quick reminder for the next session that the speakers list is open 1 hour before the session starts. There's obviously a robust interest in the tolerance and non-discrimination session, so I urge you to arrive an hour early to sign up. Please leave your headset and receiver in the room. At this point, I invite participants to the side events. I know for a fact room 2 will have a very interesting one on hate crimes, and to the next session after that. Thank you very much.